making the second age of Middle-earth into a 5-season TV show. Go. Hi, I'm Trevor Odinset. This is my YouTube channel, and it's fair to say I'm a bit frustrated with what they've done with Rings of Power. So perhaps as a therapeutic process, and having seen Men of the West do sort of a video back at the start of season 1 of the Rings of Power, it's what would you do if you had this legacy in your hands? I have tried to be as gracious and as forgiving as I can do towards the show, from before it aired to lots of the controversies that were sort of made of diverse casting and look and feel, and wanted to wait till I saw it to give it every chance of seeing it and it having every opportunity to show its quality. And the quality it has shown is poor. So after the disappointment of episode 7, I came home and it's just like, let me have another look at the timeline. How do you break this down and make 5 seasons for a show and make it sort of true to the narrative, true to what Tolkien wrote, and also entertaining? Now, the Second Age covers 3,441 years. Which, I know, off the bat you go, or had you? Really, if you just go on mathematics alone, each season you want to cover about 700 years. And you need to make a decision there about continuity, relatability of characters, and sort of getting across some of the critical points of the underlying theme of the Second Age of Middle-earth. I find it interesting that while House of the Dragon doesn't cover quite an extensive period of time, they have changed actors for characters and introduced new characters after, say, maybe 1 episode or 2 episodes. There are some consistent characters, but there are some that have grown up and had to have actors changed, including, let's say, probably one of the main characters of the show, to cover changes in time. It's not hard to treat humans in the show of the Second Age of Middle-earth by creating some simple attachments to each character and to create a lineage that links them as the age plays out, as the centuries pass. You have some grace with Númenóreans because they have a longer lifespan, and in addition, the humanity of the situation is the underlying theme of critical importance in the Second Age. So to ignore that is a massive mistake. It's like shooting fish in a barrel if I want to take shots at the Rings of Power. And I'm trying not to do that. And I'm going to include what I think are also the positives from Rings of Power, because there are some. Um, so, to begin with, looking at what would be season 1, it's just like we stay in the region around Linden, Moria, and that area. We don't need to go to the Southlands. And it's introducing and creating some lower level drama to lead into a season finale and then onto a season 2, and pacing over the 5 seasons for the Rings of Power. I would still keep that name, I think. Obviously it is one of the key events in the Second Age, is the creation of the Rings of Power. I can understand sort of maybe trying to want to bring that into the first season, but if you are a Tolkien fan, and assuming you're watching this because you are a Tolkien fan, I mean, assuming you're watching the show is because you're a Tolkien fan, then you want to see how that lore plays out, how this quite basic timeline is filled out to create drama and tension and entertainment. So before I go through how I'd pace and set up season 1, characters. Well, for me, I think the first thing I'd do is Galadriel should not be the main character. Keep her as she is in The Lord of the Rings, as a support character, a character of wisdom and power, and certainly have her appear in season 1 in particular with the timeline. There's a lot of sort of recovering going on from the War of Wrath, from Beleriand sinking. Pretty much the Second Age begins with everyone sort of reacting and recovering to the devastation of gods coming to Middle-earth to wage war to destroy Melkoth and to cast him into the void. So the first entries for the Second Age are the establishment of Linden, the establishment of new sort of settlements or kingdoms, and seeing how the survivors and the free peoples of Middle-earth set up the Second Age. So Galadriel, for me, shouldn't be a main character. I would, however, use her daughter, Celebrian. Obviously, you can take some liberties. You can stretch sort of the lore a little bit to make things work. I mean, you could just create a brand new character, and this is one of the things Rings of Power has done that have been good, in the likes of Arondir, Adar, Bronwyn. I just sort of bring these into a story centred in one sort of region of Middle-earth. You don't need the Southlands. For me, I'd make Elrond the main character, Galadriel, Celeborn's daughter, the main female character, and have these two be your drive for the story. And there's reasons for that I'll get into for season 1, which set up really the whole theme for the 5 seasons, the Second Age, and going into the Third Age, and duty-bound sort of honour for our main characters, Elrond and Celebrian, and their descendants. Everything then ties in. And this is, at its heart, the reason J.R.R. Tolkien gave us these details in like the appendices in Return of the King. It is such that his story is reliant on his extensive world building, that to throw it all away, copyright or not, is ridiculous. Anyway, other main characters. Celebrimbor, important. Gil-galad, yes. I'd include Círdan. Obviously Sauron. And I'd keep Adar, so we've got a season 1 bad guy. Arondir and Bronwyn I would also keep. Mainly because while we have a main timeline that we don't want to break, we've got to have stories for each of the episodes to create excitement, drama, action, and sort of tragedy. For me, season 1, really, why Elrond really has to be the main character is because of the decisions he and his brother Elros make. So let's go over sort of, for me, there's a 750-year period that I've made some bullet points from the notes. And like I say, for me, the show has to start, even if you don't refer to it as the War of Wrath or whatever, you've got to have this intro of mass devastation and the free peoples, elves, men and dwarves, fleeing away from pretty much a large section of a continent sinking beneath the waves. Obviously, before returning to Valinor, the gods give Elros and Elrond the choice to determine their own fates. And as we've had references to Elendil and Elwing, Elrond and Elros' mother and father, this has to be the critical decision that sets up everything that happens. As humans, with our limited lifespans, less so than even the Númenóreans, we can easily say immortality. It has to be immortality. Why does Elros even choose mortality? You pay that off. You pay off why he chooses that. Why he and sort of a bunch of humans sail and establish Númenor. And they live this mortal life. While in Middle-earth, life goes on. So you make a big deal of that decision. Don't off-screen it. Don't ignore it. It's critical to why there is this eventual downfall of Númenor. Now, what you do is, with some of these secondary characters and the main characters, have Celebrian be the character they've tried to make Galadriel in Rings of Power. She's off doing adventures, while Elrond is maybe sort of in the aftermath of his brother choosing mortality and goes off to Númenor. He is more interested in sort of the council decisions that eventually go to form the White Council with Galadriel, amongst others, that there is this earnest attempt to create these new kingdoms, these new boundaries and that. And sort of let Celebrian bring in Arondir. Maybe have, I say, you don't have to have all humans go to Númenor. Have some stay behind. You have love interests. So Bronwyn and Arondir, they could have this love interest. And obviously with, say, I don't know, 6 to 8 episodes, and you're covering 100-year periods, you get in a decent story told of for a love story, and then in the next episode you lose Bronwyn because she's only human, and if 100 years pass, she's dead. So then the next episode you have an adventure where you bring in descendant. You have maybe Arondir watching over Theo. It could be Theo. You can have sort of callbacks to Aragorn before the Fellowship sets out from Rivendell, looking at his mother's grave. Theo could do shadowing, retelling. It's thing. You create the bond. Time has passed, and while you've got these migrating peoples or looking to set up new settlements, there's also orcs. There are fell creatures. There are problems to be dealt with. Now, with a lot of big shows, if we take the likes of Supernatural, the X-Files, where you have a episode by episode monster of the week, problem of the week, start subtle. First episode, second episode, third episode, there's a group of orcs. Some wolves that have, being led by a dire wolf that has a malicious mind or an almost sort of sentience that's not normal for normal animals. Some trolls. And week by week, for the first 3-4 episodes, you have your adventurers group. Celebrian, Arondir, random human, this line of descendants that sort of passes as time goes by. Play it down. Add in a dwarf. It works. It makes sense that as the different... You say we've got a lot of migrating dwarves. There's a big comment on that for the timeline. It makes sense to have a band of heroes brought together that, let's say, by convenience in a first or second episode come together, and then they stay together because, the actions of the bad guys are seemingly random. Like I say, a small settlement of orcs, or you think sort of like in The Hobbit when Bilbo and the dwarves encounter the trolls. There's 3 trolls, and it's just an isolated sort of encounter. You have something like that. Let's say a pack of wolves. You have your heroes coming across them in one way or another and dealing with them, and you have, let's say, a way of building that there is some threat, but it's not all grandiose and big from the get-go. Now, having had the sort of descendants of our human character, the tragedy of mortality amongst more sort of longer living or immortal characters, we are creating the narrative of aging, of mortality versus immortality. Now, when we get to the year 400 of the Second Age, so maybe 4 episodes in or the 5th episode, this is where we sort of focus more intensely on Elrond, because his brother dies. So Numenor is established, Elros has done all these great things, and now his mortality has claimed him. We can have a very somber, very sad sort of episode that really focuses on everything that Elrond has lost now and what he chooses to do. It makes sense that if there is a massive funeral, because we know the Númenóreans, Gondor, the Dunedain and that, there's almost a mistake that the bloodline of Númenor makes, which is it starts to revere the dead more than the living. So again, we have a massive funeral. Elrond attends. Elrond is justifiably very, very grief-stricken. He is now the last of his family. And the royalty of that Elros has put in motion in Numenor, we create a bond where Elrond sort of, you are my last living family. If there's anything I can ever do, I will always be there to help you. This sets up going sort of into the events of Lord of the Rings and the fact that by the time he establishes Rivendell, he watches over the line of the Dunedain, that by the time Aragorn is born, he's still fulfilling that oath that goes all the way back to this tragic moment. And let Robert Aramayo really explore the conflict of emotions that Elrond must have gone through, and sort of we can then have him return to Lindon towards the end of this sort of 4th or 5th episode, very grief-stricken, very down, and this is where sort of to end this sort of somber episode in a positive light. This is when he can meet Celebrian for the first time, or see her, or they engage in a way that suggests romance, that suggests what goes on to be. Once they establish Rivendell and they're married and they have their children, Elladan, Elrohir, Arwen, who Aragorn marries. So there's Celebrian saves Elrond in some respect, and again plays on the immortality versus the mortality. Now, that's the year 400, death of Elros. Year 500, all we've got as an entry is Sauron stirs. So, general kind of peace, but adventure and random bad guys in isolated pockets being a problem for our active heroes, our action heroes. So Sauron stirs. For me, this is, you then seed the idea that maybe these random encounters aren't so random. Or, and again, this ties in with something they've tried to do with Rings of Power, there's a call to arms. Maybe there's some organising force behind it. We can have Adar. Doesn't necessarily you don't have to include Sauron. Sauron is stirring, Sauron is exerting some influence. But you let Adar be your season 1 finale bad guy. Everything leads to a hidden fortress or a hidden encampment that some wolves are taking orders from, or wargs, or some orcs, some trolls. Someone lets slip, or our rangers, Arondir and Celebrian, our heroes, discover there is something connecting these seemingly random encounters, and they pursue it. They discover an amassing force of dark creatures, fell creatures, evil, so that we can have a season 1 finale. Now, another 100 years pass, so in the year 600, we know that Numenorians start landing on the coastlines of Middle-earth. Well, okay, what we do with that is sort of, you make of that what you will. Exploration. I don't know, you try and make some drama, or just some, well, okay, the Numenorians, their kingdom's very well established by now, and they're starting to explore the seas, to land on Middle-earth, to explore. And if you want to make it a little bit Star Trek, make it a little bit Star Trek. It's you got a little bit of room to play around here. And finally, when you get to the end of the season, as I say, it's like 750 of the Second Age. Eregion is founded by the Noldor. Well, this is where you sort of have that as sort of the last sort of piece on the board to establish as much positive forward motion going on, offset by our heroes and allied forces having brought news that there is a gathering evil, but it's not so big. It's you have your heroes confront these gathering forces, confront Adar, and you have a finale battle. And what happens is sort of the heroes are victorious. So yay! Season 1 ends on a high. Evil is beaten, but there's no sort of genocidal, let's murder them all. Have it that sort of the broken forces, led by Adar, you can kill him or you don't have to kill him. It makes sense that he's, like in Rings of Power, he's got an intellect, he thinks for himself, he's concerned for his children or his forces. They flee to Mordor. They flee to the Southlands. You can even have sort of their flight from the main region of season 1. So sort of maybe they head for the coast, and Numenor has sort of established a scouting force there. So they're drive them down to the Southlands, drive them down to the land that becomes Mordor. And that's how you can end season 1. I don't know, have that sort of ending sort of scene with the land we know to be Mordor in the distance, and that sort of cursing sort of vow made by the bad guys that this is not over. End season 1. Let's say there's a lot of opportunity to create drama between all of our characters. It could work. I mean, it's true to the lore. Now, this video's gone on a little bit longer than I intended, and there's like 4 more seasons. Let's just touch slightly on season 2, which covers the years 700 to 1400. And the very first act, episode 1 of season 2, is Sauron establishing Mordor. Excuse me. So, there you go. It's start season 2 with the establishment of Mordor, and you know, game on. This is game on. The good guys back up there and over there and blah, blah, blah. They're all quite happy with themselves. It can continue. And there's been sort of a punch in the gut towards the bad guys, and Sauron's, let's say, bring him in, and then you can do season 2. And I'll touch upon that in another video, I think, because I didn't quite think this would be quite so long a ramble on throwing out ideas. So if you've watched this, thank you. Let's say it's as much therapeutic for me as I hope it might be for some of you, and just goes to show to some extent that it's doable. And as a Tolkien fan, for me, this would be preferable. I just don't understand why they've done what they've done with Rings of Power. Thank you very much. Cheers. Goodbye. Take care.